20 years ago, there were very few seals in these parts. Now there are hundreds of them. What's happened here is typical of the sudden increase in grey seal numbers that's happened all over Britain over the last 20 or 30 years. This is the Isle of May in the Firth of Forth, and this particular seal, the grey seal, is quite rare, but about 60% of all grey seals live in the waters around Britain. They're Britain's largest carnivores. But not everybody's happy with this sudden boom in grey seal numbers. Fishermen claim that the seals eat large numbers of the fish that they're trying to catch, and they put the commercial value of these fish at some millions of pounds a year. And what's more, the seals haul out onto the land every year during the breeding season, and they can devastate their surroundings, and so drive some of the other wildlife away. Members of the Sea Mammal Research Unit are responsible for studying the ecology of grey seals, and also for advising on their management.
Our main task is not just to count the population and estimate the total size of it and the sort of error there is associated with those estimates, but also to provide advice on how the population could be managed to achieve certain objectives. And it depends what your priorities are. And if you're interested in exploiting the population, then you're after a part of the population that has commercial value, and for seal populations in general, those are the pups. If you're trying to control the population, either by holding it level or reducing it, you want to remove that part of the population that produces the most pups each year, and in general that tends to be the mature females. Similarly, if you want to increase the size of the population, you really want to encourage that segment of the population to grow. That's not always easy, but in theory that's what you aim for.
Grey seals are widely distributed around the North Atlantic. A few of these colonies are in Cornwall, Wales and Ireland, but the major colonies are clustered around Scotland. The largest single colony is the island of Rona, where there are 8,000 seals. Scattered through the Inner and Outer Hebrides there are 49,000. In the Shetlands are 3,500, and in the Orkneys, 18,000. Further to the south, there are 8,000 seals on the most famous colony, the Farne Islands, and more recently, a new colony of 1,500 seals on the Isle of May. Every autumn, grey seals congregate at breeding grounds on remote exposed parts of the coast and offshore islands. The adult females, the cows, are smaller and lighter coloured than the adult males, the bulls. In the space of a few weeks, the cows give birth and then mate before going back out to sea. The breeding season occurs at different times in the autumn in different parts of Britain. Here, on the Isle of May, the birth season reaches its peak in mid-November. Within 2 or 3 days of coming ashore, the cows give birth. Each cow has 1 pup. Then they suckle their pup for anything up to 17 or 18 days. During this time, the cows deliver an enormous amount of very nutritious milk, and the pups roughly treble their weight to about 50 kilograms. Neither the cows nor the bulls eat during the entire breeding season, and they lose a lot of weight. After the pups are weaned, the cows become sexually receptive for a couple of days and mate. These matings ultimately result in a pup that's born at the same time next year. There are, in fact, between 5 and 10 times as many cows in the colony as bulls. And it's common to see a bull surrounded by a temporary assemblage of cows. But from time to time, the cows will move on and mate with other bulls. This sometimes causes ritualized fights between bulls.
At the end of the breeding season, these adults then return to the sea and feed voraciously. For the first 5 or 6 years of their life, the young juveniles may disperse widely throughout the seas of northern Europe.
For biologists who want to study their population dynamics, grey seals are really rather awkward animals to work with. The breeding adults and their pups are accessible enough, and you can count them and observe their behaviour and so on. But it's not possible to study the whole population, because out there, spread out over a wide area of the sea, is a substantial portion of that population, the juveniles and non-breeding adults, and you simply can't get near them. So why do we talk about the dynamics of a population? It's because the population's constantly changing with time. Imagine that I knew exactly how many adults and pups of each sex were present in this breeding colony right now, almost as though I'd taken a snapshot of them.
Imagine now that we look again at the population in a week's time. The situation would certainly be different, with a different number of adult males, adult females and pups. If it were the height of the birth season, there would be an increase in the number of pups around. But some of those that were alive a week ago would be dead by now, because a lot of pups die in the first week of life. The number of adults can change too. New adults swim in and join the population. Others may leave and a few will die. A population of animals such as seals changes greatly as time passes. It can get bigger or smaller, and the proportion of animals in the population of different ages and sexes can also fluctuate widely. If we want to understand the dynamics of a population, we need to study it at more than one instant in time.
It helps to think of a population as a reservoir, which animals enter by birth or immigration, and which they leave by death or emigration. Now, if any one of these factors changes, then so too will the size and composition of the population. So, for example, if the birth rate goes up, the population will increase in size and the proportion of pups in it will go up too. On the other hand, if pup mortality goes up, the population will shrink and the proportion of pups in the population will go down. So it's obviously important to be able to measure birth and death rates and emigration and immigration rates. But how do we go about getting hold of all this information?
Aerial photography is the main method that the Sea Mammal Research Unit uses to estimate the grey seal population. The flights are used to obtain a series of counts of the number of live pups on each of the breeding sites. The counts are spaced up to a week apart, so that by the end of the 6-week birth season, there can be up to 6 counts for each site. The plane flies at about 800 feet, and then, when it's in position above the animals, an automatic camera takes a series of overlapping pictures.
Stop. 5, 2, 300 degrees again. Now, do you want to count the rest?
The pictures are then examined with a stereo viewer, which throws the beaches into relief to help pick out adult seals and pups from the background. From these counts, it's possible to work out the pup production, that is, the number of pups. From the pup production, provided you make certain assumptions, you can then work out the population size. The accuracy of this method depends very much on the quality of the photographs. Sometimes it can be difficult to distinguish seal pups from sheep. To make sure that the results of this aerial technique are accurate, they have to be checked against precise counts made on the ground. Coloured dye is put onto each pup to avoid counting them twice. Every few days they're recounted, as only about 2/3 of all the pups are present on the land at any one time. On the Isle of May, several hundred pups are born each season. In order to study the dispersion of pups from breeding sites, About 10% of them are tagged each season. From sightings of tagged seals, we now know that the seals spread out widely from these breeding colonies, but those from the Isle of May and Farne Islands stay mainly around the North Sea. In crowded parts of the colonies, pups grow more slowly than in less crowded areas. To find out exactly how this growth rate varies with population density, repeated weighings are carried out on selected individuals.
Put him down and let him go.
Once the number of pups in the population has been worked out, it's then possible to estimate the size of the whole population, provided you know something about the ages of the animals. The dentition of the pups can tell us a lot about the early development of seals. If you take a tooth from a dead animal and cut it across, you can tell how old the seal was. It turns out that seal teeth have rings in them, and that one ring is laid down each year, rather like tree rings. So all you have to do to find out the age is count the rings. This technique was put to use in the 1970s when over 1,000 females and about 300 males were killed in the Farne Islands. And this provided the scientists with a unique opportunity to work out the number of adults in any particular age group. Taking the females first, it turned out that around 70 was 7 years old. The older the females, the fewer there were of them. There was a fairly constant mortality among adult females regardless of their age. Roughly 6% of each age died in the following year. As a result, very few individuals were older than 35. In reality, the situation wasn't quite as regular as this. With adult males, the mortality was significantly higher. 20% of all adult males of a particular age died during the following year. Consequently, their mean age was much lower than for the females. Few males were older than 25. 90% of all the females which were killed were pregnant and would have given birth that year. In other words, there would have been a 90% birth rate. 1,000 adult females would have produced 900 pups, of which about half would have been females. There would have been 450 new female pups. The mortality of pups during the first year of life is of the order of 30%. Only 300 females would make it to the second year of life. We don't know how many juvenile females there are in the population, but by using our knowledge of pup and adult mortality, we can guess that they fit in with the general pattern like this. All we have to do now, to find out the total number of females in the population, is add up the number of individuals of each age. So you can work out the total number of females in any grey seal population from the number of pups, provided you have an idea of its age composition. It's difficult to find out what proportion of the adult males breed, but in theory you can arrive at an estimate of the number of males in the population in a similar way. And by adding this to the female population, estimate the total population. Now that we know the key population parameters, we need to find out what affects them. An important factor is the food supply. An adult seal eats a lot of fish, around 15 pounds a day. In all, grey seals around Britain eat several thousand tons a year. Despite the fact that they are in direct competition with ourselves, on the whole, they seem to get enough to eat. But there's some evidence that food supply affects pup production. If there's a plentiful supply of food, the females grow faster, mature earlier, and so as a consequence, the birth rate increases. When the adult seals come ashore during the breeding season, they don't eat for several weeks. Normally, they feed vigorously during the weeks before coming ashore. Some females, however, don't eat enough food, and as a result, there's an increased chance either that they abort, or if they do give birth, that they will not give their pups enough milk. But in fact, there are other types of pup mortality. Some mothers desert their pups who then starve to death. Others die because they've been squashed by a clumsy adult. Here on the Isle of May, around 15% of the pups die. The main breeding site is located on the gentle easterly side of the island. There's plenty of space for the mother to give birth to her pup well away from the sea, typically just above the high water mark. But in other places around the British Isles, there's very little space for the pups beneath the sea cliffs. Pups are more likely to be crushed or drowned by heavy seas. Colonies that breed on the rugged coasts of Cornwall and Pembrokeshire have pup mortalities twice as high as those that breed on the more gentle sites. Just how important it is that seals have enough space to rear their pups and so avoid being crushed has been shown in the Farne Islands. Some of the islands there have become very crowded indeed, and pup mortality is in places as high as 60%. As the number of pups born increased, relatively more pups died. Where the number of pups born is lower, then a higher percentage will survive. Overcrowding can also cause adults to emigrate to nearby islands for breeding. One reason why the number of seals has increased so rapidly here on the Isle of May over recent years may well be the overcrowding on the Farne Islands 50 miles to the south. Seals that were distinctively marked on the Farne Islands so that they could be recognised later have turned up here. So we know they've emigrated from their original population and immigrated into this one. There's another seal species which has been expanding rapidly onto new breeding sites. In the South Atlantic, on the South Georgia Islands, the Antarctic fur seal has staged a remarkable comeback from near extinction. The discovery of South Georgia brought the sealers from Britain and America. By 1822, nearly 1.25 million seals had been killed for their furs. And by the beginning of the 20th century, the fur seal was a rare sight anywhere around South Georgia. By 1907, there were just a few individuals left on the westernmost island, Willis Island. The seals became protected, and since then there's been a population explosion. In the 1930s, some fur seals were sighted on Bird Island. By 1960, they had also colonised several sites on the South Georgia mainland. And throughout the 1970s and 1980s have colonised more and more breeding sites. Today, there are probably as many as 1 million fur seals. On Bird Island alone, 150,000 individuals come ashore during the breeding season. Also, the fur seals have increased because of large reductions in the baleen whale population. The whales used to eat a lot of krill, but now it's available to the fur seals. Many of the breeding sites are surrounded by tussock grass. As the population explosion continues, more and more seals are moving into these areas and destroying the vegetation. In several places, they are eroding away raised beaches present since the last global change in sea level, and experts now believe that the fur seals are occupying new breeding sites. Predation is an important factor which can control any population. For fur seals, human beings were once the main predators. And for grey seals, we are again the only predator. Nowadays, the main purpose of culling is not for marketing seal products, but to keep the population down, and so, it's hoped, reduce the damage to fisheries and to the natural environment.
In 1959, a special consultative committee on grey seals was set up to look at the changes in the grey seal population and also the effect it was having on fisheries. Now, one of the recommendations of that working group was that attempts should be made to control populations of grey seals in Orkney and the farms, and they did that by killing pups. They started killing pups about 600 or 700 a year in 1962, and that cull has really continued almost to the present day. The pup production, however, continued to increase after 1962, and it really showed almost no change. So it's 5 or 6 years before a pup cull starts to have a noticeable effect on the number of pups born. And you can see that here, that pup production increased by about 6% a year from 1962 up till 1967, 1968, and then it dropped. From that time onwards, the pup production continued to increase, but it increased more slowly than it had been up until 1968. It started to increase quite dramatically after that, and in fact, from 1975 to 1980, it's been increasing faster than it was before the culls. But it shows that two things. One, that pup culls don't have an immediate effect, there's a time lag. And the other thing is that you have to keep increasing them if the population's increasing, if they're going to have any stabilising effect. Well, there are really 2 points in the history of the Farne Islands where control operations have been brought into effect. The first attempt at control was in 1962, at the same time as in Orkney. And for 3 years they killed pups. In fact, they specialised in killing female pups in an attempt to get more control. But as we saw with Orkney, those culls down here had no discernible effect on the rate of increase of the population. It continued to rise. However, about that time, a decision was made to try and control the population by killing adult females as well as killing pups. And in 72, there was a large cull of between 300 and 400 females. And you can see an immediate effect on the population. The pup production dropped in 1972 and in subsequent years. And there was another similar sized cull in 1975, which again brought the population down very markedly to this sort of level. Since then, the aim of the National Trust has been to hold the number of pups born each year at around 1,000. And they've done that by a series of small culls and by keeping seals off of particular islands. And you can see here that the pup production now is around 1,000 and seems, although it's decreasing slightly, to be moderately stable.
But from what we know about the age structure of the population, we can work out that for every 10 pups culled, we would expect that only one of them would have survived to become a pregnant female 7 years later. So culling 10 mature females would have a much greater and more immediate impact on the size and potential breeding capabilities of the colony.
Everybody knows that the control of seals is an emotive issue. Pups are particularly delightful animals, and people feel revulsion at the thought of killing seals. But what we've tried to show in this programme is that if you do have to manage seal populations, then you've got to be familiar with their population dynamics. And what's more, you've got to apply exactly the same principles whether you're dealing with the management of attractive animals like these seals or the management of less immediately appealing animals like the carriers of diseases or agricultural pests.